that the people were hungry, that he had not killed for sport, nor had he killed because he disliked the buffalo. He killed because his children had to have food. Now this sounds somewhat as an appeasement, but there is a second line to it that is much more interesting. Because the Indians had a belief that every so many thousands of years, animals and humans exchanged places, and that in some time, in the infinite future, it would happen that he, as the hunter, would be, in turn, the hunted. So he said to the spirit of the buffalo, "When the time comes and I am a buffalo, and you are a man, I will give my body as you have given yours." This was a religious conviction, and was one of the strange and rather interesting details of Indian thought and life. Now, the Indians also were very much given to solving problems simply and efficiently. They had very simple tribal laws, but in many cases their laws were exceedingly wise. If in a tribe where Sitting Bull was the medicine priest and the mystical counselor and the paterfamilias of all of these Indians, two young braves got into a quarrel. It was a bitter quarrel, and there was bad word and threat of violence. But no one could go against the medicine priest. So the medicine priest stepped in between them. They didn't dare say anything to him. And he said, "Dig a hole." So the two did as they were told. They dug a hole about 4 feet deep in the earth. And he then turned to one and says, "Say your hate into the hole." And he said to the other, "Say your hate into the hole. Now cover it up and shake hands." That was the solution to a delicate problem. And also Sitting Bull was responsible for certain laws concerning the treatment of people. If, as was sometimes the case, hunting was difficult, and food was not too abundant even from the herds that were still undecimated, the Indian finally came back with a kill or food or whatever he could bring. Immediately the medicine priest took over. In fact, he didn't have to after the first time because it became automatic. He said, "You have food. All right. You must not say who you are or what you bring, but each of you in secret will take a piece of that food and place it at the entrance to the wigwam of every widow and every child. They eat first. If there's not enough, the brave man does not eat at all. If there's enough, the old and the young must come first. The sick must also be considered. And only what is left shall be divided equally among all the rest. No one shall have more than another. No one shall have less than another." This was the law of the tribe. Now, this type of law, of course, would be a little difficult for us to understand, perhaps, but there is something in it that seems to belong strangely to America, and perhaps has something we could learn from these elders that went before. Now, along the Atlantic seaboard, there was the most highly evolved group of Indians, probably, on the North American continent. And they formed together the Great League of the Iroquois. The Iroquois of the 6 nations and of the 7, the Great League of Peace. And this league consisted of what was called the Long House. And it said in law, now here you're Indian, he couldn't read or write, but he said the earth is one long house. Everybody on it is one family. Everyone on it lives in the same house, which is the place we live, and everyone is responsible to keep the peace. This is final. Now the long house was developed by an Indian mystic, Gatto, and he was, like the Jewish patriarch, slow of speech. And he found another Indian who was later to become the Hiawatha of Longfellow's poem, who was to be his spokesman. And he was the one who carried the doctrine of the long house to the people of the 6 nations, later 7 nations. And the long house was where they spread the white cloth of the peace. And it was a kind of Congress or Senate. Each tribe or division of the house, of the long house, each had its own representative called a sachem. We would call them a senator. They were the lawmakers, and they gathered at regular times to make the laws of the tribe. And it's interesting to note that the women of the tribe did not attend these meetings and did not participate in the legislative procedure, but they, and they alone, voted for and selected the senators. No one could occupy a position of authority in the Great League unless he was elected by women. The second thing that is interesting about this particular point, certainly, and one that needs perhaps more consideration than we've given it, and that is that the women of the tribe also implied and demanded a certain rule of the League of the Nations. That is, no senator could vote for anything relating to his own tribe. Every one of the senators could vote on everyone's tribe except his own, because it decided that there should be no way in which he could vote a special advantage to his own people. This is something that, might sometime have a thought for the future. You don't know. It has a point or two. Now, when the sachems met in tribal Congress, the time came for the great meeting. The word was spoken. The door is open. The door is open meant that everyone could have his say. But, however, there must never be any unkind language. Never should one candidate or one senator rebuke another. No one should tell what was wrong with the other. He should tell what was right with what he thought was necessary. He should not say, I'm wiser, I am brighter, I am better informed than the others. He should say, this is what I propose. Everyone can have their own say. And when it was all finished and it was decided what was going to happen, then the door was closed again, and these senators went back to their normal tribal responsibilities. A group of these were sent to England at one time in the early days, while the tribe of the League of Nations was still very powerful, and presented at court, and they made a tremendous impression. They arrived in full feathers, with all their bearskins and their moccasins and their beadwork, and the reports of the English government at that time said that they were the most solemnly honorable people they had ever seen, that they were there for a purpose, and they did the purpose for which they were appointed. Now the tribe went along and gradually involved some other members, and was gradually becoming a very powerful instrument. It still exists in certain parts of Canada as a tribal rule or a tribal law or procedure. One of the most interesting points, perhaps, in connection with this was the relationship between the Great League and William Penn. William Penn was one of the white people whom the Indians learned to really like. And they admired him on the ground that they knew he would never break his word, that he always kept his promise, and he was always fair to them. When Penn came to the United States, he brought with him a grant of land from the King of England. The King of England charged Penn's family and those settlers that went with him a very tidy sum for this grant. So when he left, he told the king, he had an audience with the king, told the king he was going to make arrangements to purchase this land from the Indians. And the king said, but you've already bought it from me, and I think you paid a pretty good price for it. And Penn said, I'm sorry, sire, I can't take it that way, because you have no right to sell it to me. It belonged to the Indians, and I'm paying them for it. This is what they liked about him among the Indians. Also, the tribe developed what was called the Peace Belt, possibly the first passport that we know of. The peace belt was made either shell wampum or bead wampum. And the great peace belt of Penn is in exhibition until Philadelphia now. But this peace belt enabled a member of the tribes to travel anywhere among all most distant and warlike peoples. And if he carried the peace belt, he was absolutely safe. No one would do anything to injure him. Because one of the things these people did have that was very important was they had a certain integrity of spirit that was not easily affected by changing circumstances. All of which now brings us to one of the keynote situations of the whole matter. What is the way in which we can best define the way of the Indian religion? First of all, we must assume that it is a natural religion, a religion that comes from observation and reflection and not from indoctrination. The Indian lives close to nature, and like most primitive people, even now, the Indians had a very deep, mysterious communion with the earth. They came so close to dependency upon it that they gained a great respect for nature. They respected all life, every living thing. They respected and believed in life, and they believed that all creatures, great and small, had souls just as much as they had. That everything was alive, everything was divine in its substance and essence, and regardless of circumstances must always be treated with respect and decency. That we learn mostly by quietly contemplating the realities of life. In the Southwest, there's no doubt in the world that the sand paintings and the great chants of the Abachai are mandalas, that they are meditation symbols. They were created especially for a purpose, most of them, and that purpose was healing. But the actual symbol itself, if you go to one reservation today and one of the surviving medicine priests makes a sand painting, and you go to another reservation 200 miles away and have another painter do the same subject, these men have never met each other. They've had no contact of any kind, but there will not be the slightest difference between the two pictures. These pictures come down from a traditional background. They are carried in the mind for ages. They are part of the orenda. They are part of the way in which the Indian, not having a written language, makes pictures of the realities of his own existence. Pictures for the contemplation of life. These pictures have meanings for others, but a special meaning for himself. For he's actually drawing a picture of his own inner life, of the part of himself which belongs to the great world around and above. This type of picture, therefore, is a meditation device or symbol. The Indian's final contact with life is the voices. Now these we would term psychic impressions. We would assume perhaps that the olds and the trues, the ancestral spirits, might come and speak to him. He believed that they did. But there is a certain difference between the psychism of the American Indian and the psychic phenomena of our modern civilization. The difference is in the situation and in the values involved. The American Indian had no preconceptions of life. He had nothing within himself to fight the realities which he desired to experience. He had not been indoctrinated with all kinds of beliefs. He had not developed intense neuroses of one kind or another. He had not so complicated his own inner life that when he was perfectly quiet, the thing that came through was a babble of voices. He was completely simple in himself. He expected to live and die in the position he occupied. He had no thought of wealth, no desire for authority. He had no concept of the complication of his life or of his civilization. He lived out his years as a part of a small tribal